West Ham take on Brighton this weekend in a pretty big game for both clubs. I think we've both got aspirations now of trying to push into Europe. I'd say Brighton are in a slightly better position than West Ham so far this season, but recent form for Brighton hasn't looked too good. They obviously got that win against City and away at Bournemouth back to back not that long ago, but they haven't been able to win, I think, their last 4 Premier League games since then. West Ham, however, a lot of stuff's been going on. Obviously, we picked up that point on the road at Bournemouth. Fortunately, not fortunately, that's up for debate. But we're going to be dissecting the match preview of West Ham versus Brighton in this episode and looking at how Brighton play, how West Ham can potentially look to exploit some of those weaknesses in the Brighton build-up and press and their defensive structure, but also looking at ways that Brighton will be looking to hurt West Ham, so vice versa. And we'll be looking at how the teams have got on so far. But if you do enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, as that's massively helping us out. And yeah, without further ado, let's do a little bit of a tale of the tape as we normally do so far this season in the Premier League. So West Ham on 19 points to Brighton's 24. We've scored 21 goals and Brighton have scored 26. We've conceded 29 goals to Brighton's 25. And we are currently sitting in 14th position and Brighton are just in a top 10 in 9th position. If we change this over to the expected stats, Brighton are kind of on par with where they're kind of expected to be roughly in terms of the points. West Ham slightly above where we should be at 17.58. Our expected goals scored of 25.18 to Brighton's 25.98. So they've been a little bit better in front of goal in terms of expected statistics. Expected goals conceded, West Ham a lot higher than Brighton at 33.16 to their 26.36. And the expected position, so we should be one place less than we currently are in 15th, and Brighton should be 2 positions lower in 11th. But that doesn't tell the whole story. If you're a West Ham fan, I'm assuming most people watching this are West Ham fans. We know the issues, the structural issues, the lack of intensity we've seen from West Ham this season, the lack of identity, really. With Brighton, they're kind of going through a different type of transition with a very young manager coming in and trying to instill his philosophy into an already really established technical team that De Zerbi and Potter left in their kind of reigns from past tenures. But it's a very difficult thing to do. West Ham's is slightly different because we've gone from such a difference in stylism for what we're trying to do. Brighton have tried to stick to that core identity of the way they play, the type of players they have. So it hasn't been a complete new adjustment. Obviously, it's new tactics and a new manager and a new philosophy. It's going to be different, but it's not on the same scale as West Ham, in my opinion. But both teams, I would say, are still going through that adaptation period. Whether Lopetegui is going to be enough to kind of get through this adaptation and instill himself at this football club long term, that remains to be seen, as he's still under massive pressure. And there is quite a lot of pressure on this game as well, because we're at home. Last game before Christmas, we haven't been particularly good at home, but we did pick up that 3 points against Wolves last time out at the London Stadium. So we want to keep that momentum going into that Southampton game on Boxing Day. Whereas Brighton, they're trying to get back on the winning train. So it's going to be a really interesting clash. And, you know, to kind of summarize Brighton's season for you so far, they have the 7th worst defensive record in the Premier League with 25 goals conceded, and they have the 8th worst expected defensive record in the Premier League. So kind of on par. So they are leaking goals. They also have the 7th strongest defensive record in the Premier League with 26 goals scored. So they're one of the better goal scoring teams, but they're also one of the worst defensively. Oh, well, 7th worst isn't too bad, but it's still down there. It's below par. They rank 11th, as I said, for expected points on 22.90. They're averaging around 1.63 goals per game with an XG of 1.75, and they're averaging 1.56 goals conceded per game with an expected goals against of 1.61. And that final statistic there, they're averaging around 54% possession in the Premier League thus far, which, yeah, is one of the higher percentages we'll probably face in the Premier League this season. For context, that's higher than Arsenal's have been this season. And yeah, it's definitely something they're trying to continue to instill in their football club, and their mentality is possession-based football, high press, building out from the back, all of the fundamentals that they've learned under De Zerbi and Potter over the last few seasons and iterations of players that have come and gone at that football club. And it's a massive part of what got Brighton the success they've had. You know, their recruitment's been spot on. They've been able to identify some really fantastic talent across Europe and across, the world, really. And they're now in a position where they are regularly competing for the top 10, top 8 positions. They obviously had a stint in Europe as well. So they're starting to develop as a football club, and they kind of encapsulate a lot of the good that is still left in football, which is nice to see because, in a game that's so overloaded with wealth and money and financial incentives and all of this other stuff, Brighton have done it quite sustainably and very well structured, and that kind of resonates in the type of players that they're signing and the way they're playing on the football pitch. So it's going to be a difficult game for West Ham. We're going into this, I would say, with a little bit more confidence than we've had with the wins against Wolves and the draw against Brighton on Monday night. But it's still an incredibly tough game, no matter whether we're home or away. We know we don't notoriously do well against Brighton in general. I know we got the win against them last year, but I think that was our first Premier League win against them of all time. I think that's the only Premier League game we've ever beat Brighton in. So it's not going to be an easy game. And I just wanted to point out a few things with the way Brighton play and kind of emphasize that style that I'm talking about. So this is their game against Crystal Palace that they lost last time out at home. This is very early on in the game. You can see when one of their centre-backs has the ball, they're looking to play out. So Van Hecke and Dunk, their centre-backs, they will almost form a box four, as you can see here, with the midfield pairing of Ayari and Baleba. So what they do is the centre-backs will go in. Lamptey and Estepinian, who I've circled as the fullbacks, playing in a back four here. So they're playing like a 4-2-4 or a 4-2-3-1. They'll go very high and wide, as you can see here. And they trust their technical players to be able to play through this. And it just creates spaces for other players to drop into the spaces between the midfield and the Palace attack, which you'll be able to see shortly in other demonstrations. But this is how Brighton will play. And it's how they're going to always play under their manager and the way they're going to play as well. So they're going to use their goalkeeper where they need to create that overload at the back. But really, they keep their midfield players tight in the middle pivot. They keep their centre backs quite central as well, and then Lamptey and Estepinian provide that width for them. If we just move this forwards a little bit, you'll see where they've progressed the ball. Palace are kind of sitting in this mid block right now, and Van Hecke just brings the ball forwards from centre back and just continues to bring the ball. You can see the midfield pivot there, very close to each other still. But what they're trying to do is, Lamptey being this high and wide, he's looking to get into that space that's being created. Now, the person I've circled here is Ruta, and he was playing almost off of João Pedro in the striker position. So think of those two as the two strikers, and you've got Ruta here coming into this channel where very difficult for Palace because they don't know whether to come or go. They don't know whether their midfield's going to push on or whether Eze drops back in. But it just creates that uncertainty. And then that allows Lamptey to make that movement in behind. And what we see as a result is basically this. You see Brighton's front three in this sequence. So because Ruta's gone in, João Pedro is then isolating that lone striker position. And then you've got the wide players of Matoma on the left-hand side and Minter on the right-hand side. And you can see where Lamptey's already made that progression into space. And I've just circled him there, Ruta. That's the shadow 10. That's the striker that's dropping into that area and creating that space for Brighton. So that's something they're going to continuously look to do. And West Ham have to be switched on because we are not good out of possession. And we've been known, especially, I would say, at home, where there's more emphasis to do it, to go a little bit more gung-ho or try and trigger a press where it's not there. And because the London Stadium is such a big pitch, it just leaves so much space for teams to transition in. And we cannot do that against Brighton because A, the quality they have, and B, the pace. Matoma and Minter either side, if they're going to play as their wingers, they have huge, huge issues that they can cause West Ham just by their pace alone, just by the threat of that transition. Do I think West Ham will be able to deal with that over a 90-minute game? I'm hesitant, especially if we play the way we have been playing. And obviously, Carlos Soler is going to be suspended for this game. So it'll be interesting to see who comes into that midfield. But by and large, we don't make it easy for ourselves in that midfield. We don't have that agile, mobile midfielder, dynamic midfielder, as we've mentioned so many times. So I'm not going to repeat myself, but I do see us getting sucked into the Brighton way of playing a little bit. And I think if Brighton are on it, they'll play through us. And it could be a very, very difficult game for West Ham with the way we're trying to play. But in terms of Brighton going the other way as well, they're obviously going to look to press in moments where they can. With West Ham, we've seen, even with the Bournemouth game, I mean, the first half, we're barely pressed. We didn't look, promising or that promising going forwards, but we were a lot more comfortable in possession from the back because we were just allowed to play out. As soon as Bournemouth switched that in the second half and put us under a little bit of pressure and started to press us high up, we collapsed, we folded, our confidence just got diminished so much, and we just went into a shell and we just didn't know how to get out of it. And that's when we started to see some real issues on the ball. So I think Brighton will definitely be identifying that. And this is against Crystal Palace in just the third minute of the game. You can see how high up they want to press in these types of moments where they've got Palace playing from the back between their centre backs or goalkeeper. You can see in the middle there, number 26 and 20, that's their midfield pivot, Brighton. That's their double pivot of Baleba and Ayari. So they're not scared to push up. And you can see here from the second picture where Dunk is. I mean, they forced Palace to basically play it out of the touchline here. So the press worked for Brighton, but you can see how high up they play. They try to go very, very aggressive in these moments where they can. And there's positives and negatives to that. I think the one positive we can take from a West Ham perspective is there are going to be spaces for the likes of Bowen and Kudus and Somerville if he's going to play to transition, if we can find a way out of that. And I actually think, under Lopetegui, we've seen a lot of route one or long balls. I think that could be a very good weapon for West Ham if Brighton are going to go quite high on this press. I believe that those spaces in between Estepinian and Lamptey, where Dunk's pushing up high, Van Hecke's pushing up high, the midfield pivot of Brighton is pushing up high. There is a chance to exploit that because I don't think Dunk's the best, even though he's good on the ball. I think there's ways we can definitely get past Dunk. And same with Van Hecke. I think from a on the ball perspective, Brighton have it. They have it. They have the players that they need. But off the ball and defensively, it's similar to West Ham, how we've seen in the past. And we're trying to get more ball playing centre backs, but hasn't always worked, and it becomes an issue. It's almost the flip side of that for Brighton, where on the ball they're very good, but defensively is where they have some issues. And I think those over the top balls, those going a bit more direct in situations like that, where we're not trying to play out of Brighton's press, because to be honest, we'll get caught out more times than we won't. So we need to be more dynamic with how we play. We need to change it up. We need to not just rely on the long, route one passes, because Brighton will suss it out eventually. But we need to change it up, and we need to give Brighton something to think about. And I think the likes of Kudus, Bowen, Somerville, they have the potential to do that, as do Brighton on the other side with, Matoma, Minter, these types of players that are very quick, very pacey, and can hit you in transition. But, what I was saying there with Brighton's build-up, it's not just the right-hand side, it's also the left-hand side. And in this instance, it's João Pedro who I've circled. So it's not just Ruta that will do it if they're going to play that 4-4-2 or 4-2-3-1. It's also João Pedro that will come and looking to find these pockets of space between the midfield and defence. And you can see here that they're building up with Dunk. The Estepinian's gone wide. Lamptey's gone wide just out of shot on the right-hand side. And they've got the midfield pivot. But João Pedro and Ruta, they almost come into those spaces between the fullback and midfield to create the space for Estepinian and Lamptey to push on. But it also allows Brighton to be a little bit more direct. As you can see here, who is circled? João Pedro and Ruta. Van Hecke has the ball. Okay, they're not scared to go long or in behind. And what this does is just when you're a centre back and you don't have like a natural striker to mark, it can be very difficult to stay concentrated in these moments and know where to go. So Palace are kind of just in their shape. They've got quite a high line. They've squeezed high up, but then that leaves the spaces for both Matoma and Minter to get in behind. And that's exactly what the trigger is. So João Pedro and Ruta have gone in. And then that's the trigger for either Matoma or Minter in this occasion to get in behind, and they actually come close to scoring. But it's going to be a tough game for West Ham. It's going to be a very tough game. I think Carlos Soler has actually been quite good for West Ham in the last couple of games, so he's actually going to be a miss to some extent. So again, it'll be interesting to see how we match up there. Again, is Todibo going to be ready to come back in, or has he still got that toe injury? That's also a question. Luckily, we have Emerson back, so I'd expect him to come back into left back and Wan-Bissaka to move right back. And then the front three of West Ham, how are we going to play that front three? Fulkrug obviously got, 35 minutes against Bournemouth. Do I think he's ready to start? Probably not. Would I start him? Probably not. I'd like to see, either a front three of Kudus, Bowen, Somerville, with Kudus as the kind of false nine or Bowen as the false nine. Probably more Kudus if possible. But then again, who are we going to play in midfield? I would expect the midfield three to be Alvarez, Souček, Paqueta. But that being said, Paqueta played in the front three for the majority of the game against Bournemouth, so he may want to change that up. But I do believe it will be Alvarez, Souček, Paqueta as our midfield three, with a front line of Kudus, Somerville, Bowen. He may go with Fulkrug or Ings as a striker. I'm not too sure. But yeah, I'd expect the back line as well to be just Emerson coming back in and maybe Todibo push back in, but again, quite unlikely. But In terms of Brighton as well, they could have some other players like Danny Welbeck come back in. So it's hard to predict if they're going to line up exactly the same as they did against Palace. Obviously, they lost the game 3-1, so there may be a couple of changes there. But stylistically, they won't really change. It'll be the same approach from Brighton, and we have to be ready for it because it's going to be a very, very difficult game for West Ham on Saturday. But look, Bournemouth was a tough game, and we managed to get a point from that. I'm not saying it was thoroughly deserved in the end, but we did get a point from it. Wolves was obviously an up and down affair, and we managed to get the win there. So I think the fact we're at home, we have to play that to our advantage. We have to make sure we're on top of Brighton in the right moments, but we don't go out trying to press, gung ho, because Brighton have the technical ability to play through us, and they have the players in transition to hurt us. I think that's the key elements of this game. But there's going to be elements where we can press Brighton and really suffocate them at times because of the way they play and because they want to be expansive, and they've got such width with Lamptey and Estepinian. There are inevitably going to be gaps for Kudus, Bowen to pick the ball up in between those centre backs and fullback areas and drive with the ball. And that's where we might get success. It's turning over errors from Brighton, but also making sure we're not consistently going out and trying to press in moments where we definitely shouldn't press, because that's been a real issue for us under Julian Lopetegui so far this season. But in terms of a prediction, I don't think we're going to lose the game. I think it can be very difficult for West Ham, and we absolutely could lose this game, but I just don't feel it. I'm probably going to go with a draw. I'd say 1-1 or 2-2. I'll go with 2-2. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. I don't think either defense has been great this season, to put it nicely for West Ham at least. But obviously both teams have quite good offensive players at their disposal. So I think it'll make for quite a nice blend. And as I say, stylistically, it's probably going to be quite an open game throughout the 90 minutes. But yeah, I'm going to go with 2-2. Let me know your predictions down below in the comments and how you're feeling about West Ham at the moment going into this period where we've got a few games left before the Premier League season, the Premier League year ends, and we go into 2025. So yeah, massively important we keep going with our momentum. But yeah, if you enjoyed the tactical breakdown, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. And yeah, let me know your score predictions down below and what your thoughts are on West Ham at the moment, and Brighton fans as well. If you're watching, definitely let us know and give us that feedback. Subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed. And until the next one, come on, you Irons.